Welcome to a journey unlike any other. Over the next few hours, we're going to travel the world, from the hills of Hollywood to the streets of Paris, from the plains of Texas to the churchyards of England, to visit 60 of the most stunning, elaborate, and unforgettable final resting places of the famous. These are not small, forgotten graves tucked away in obscure corners. These are monuments, mausoleums that rival cathedrals, memorials that cost fortunes to build and draw millions of visitors each year. Some are grand beyond imagining. Others are breathtaking in their simplicity. All of them have a story to tell. So settle in, because we have a lot of ground to cover. And our first stop is the most visited private home in America, a home that also happens to be a cemetery. We begin in Memphis, Tennessee at Graceland, the home Elvis Presley purchased in 1957 at the age of 22. Today, Graceland is a sprawling entertainment complex visited by more than 600,000 people a year, making it the second most visited private home in the country after the White House. And the emotional center of every visit is the meditation garden. Elvis himself commissioned this garden in the mid-1960s as a personal retreat, a place for quiet reflection, away from the demands of fame. It features a semicircular colonnade of white Ionic columns, Italian statuary, an elaborate fountain with a circular pool, and special lighting that Elvis would turn on at night when he came out here to think. That tranquil space is now his final resting place, and the resting place of his parents Vernon and Gladys, his grandmother Minnie May, his daughter Lisa Marie, and his grandson Benjamin Keogh. A memorial marker for his stillborn twin brother, Jesse Garon, stands nearby. Elvis Aaron Presley hardly needs an introduction. He sold more than 1 billion records worldwide, more than any artist in history. He had 94 gold singles and over 40 gold albums. His 33 movies grossed more than $180 million. He didn't just change music. He changed the way an entire generation moved, dressed, danced, and felt about being alive. He was originally buried at Forest Hill Cemetery here in Memphis after his death in August of 1977. But after someone attempted to steal his body, both Elvis and his mother were relocated to the meditation garden at Graceland. His death was attributed to cardiac arrhythmia, with prescription drug abuse later identified as a significant contributing factor. He was 42 years old. Every August during Elvis Week, thousands of fans participate in a candlelight vigil, walking single file past these graves in the Memphis heat. Visitors from Japan, from Germany, from Brazil, from everywhere make the pilgrimage. Some weep, some sing hymns, some simply stand in silence. The large marble cross that stands in the garden was originally placed at Gladys Presley's grave at Forest Hill Cemetery and was moved here along with the family. The headstone at Gladys's grave features the Star of David, a reflection of her Jewish heritage on her mother's side, a detail that surprises many visitors. Elvis's own grave bears a lengthy bronze epitaph placed by his father Vernon that speaks of his son's generosity, his God-given talents, and the love he had for his fans. It's not just a grave, it's a shrine, and it remains one of the most visited burial sites on the face of the earth. From the king of rock and roll, we travel now to the man who saved the Union. Our next stop is the upper reaches of Manhattan, where Riverside Drive meets 122nd Street, and a massive granite and marble structure stands on a bluff 130 feet above the Hudson River. This is Grant's tomb, officially the General Grant National Memorial, and it is the largest mausoleum in North America. The structure rises 150 feet into the sky, its classical dome visible from miles away. It was designed by architect John H. Duncan and built at a cost of $600,000, raised by more than 90,000 individual donors. Many contributed just pennies and dimes. When the tomb was dedicated on April 27, 1897, on what would have been Grant's 75th birthday, an estimated 1 million spectators lined the parade route despite bad weather, watching more than 50,000 marchers proceed through the city. For the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Grant's tomb attracted 500,000 visitors a year, more than the Statue of Liberty. Inside, Beneath the dome, the space is modeled in part on Napoleon's tomb at Les Invalides in Paris. In the center of the rotunda, in an open circular crypt, sit the twin red granite sarcophagi of Ulysses S. Grant and his wife, Julia Dent Grant. Mosaic murals by Alan Cox, added in 1966, depict scenes from Grant's Civil War campaigns, Vicksburg, Missionary Ridge, and the surrender at Appomattox. Grant, of course, served as commanding general of the Union Army and accepted Lee's surrender, ending the bloodiest war in American history. He then served 2 terms as the 18th President of the United States, during which he worked to protect the civil rights of formerly enslaved people and to dismantle the Ku Klux Klan. Historians have, in recent decades, reassessed Grant's presidency far more favorably than earlier generations did. In his final years, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, likely the result of a lifelong cigar habit. Knowing death was near, he spent his remaining months in a race against time, writing his memoirs at a cottage in upstate New York, determined to finish before the cancer took him. He completed the manuscript just days before he died in July of 1885, at the age of 63. His friend Mark Twain published those memoirs through his own publishing house, and the 2-volume set became a massive bestseller that earned Grant's widow nearly $500,000, securing his family's financial future. The memoirs themselves are widely regarded as the finest autobiography ever written by an American president. The inscription on the tomb's facade reads, "Let us have peace," words from Grant's letter accepting the Republican nomination for president in 1868, and a fitting epitaph for a man who spent the first half of his life fighting a war, and the second half trying to heal the nation it had torn apart. From the grandest mausoleum in the country, we travel to one of the most intimate final resting places in all of Los Angeles. Westwood Village Memorial Park is a small, unassuming cemetery tucked behind high-rise office buildings just off Wilshire Boulevard, easy to drive right past without knowing it exists. But step inside, and you'll find one of the densest concentrations of celebrity graves anywhere in the world. The most visited belongs to Marilyn Monroe. Her crypt is in the Corridor of Memories, a modest marble wall vault marked with a bronze plaque bearing only her name and the years 1926 and 1962. No epitaph, no title, no description of who she was. Just her name, which is all anyone has ever needed. The marble around her crypt has been discolored over the decades by the lipstick kisses of adoring fans. Fresh flowers appear regularly, sometimes daily. Hugh Hefner purchased the crypt directly beside hers, so the publisher of Playboy could spend eternity next to the magazine's most famous cover subject. Marilyn Monroe was, of course, the most iconic sex symbol of the 20th century and one of the finest comedic actresses Hollywood has produced. Gentlemen prefer blondes. Some like it hot. The 7-Year Itch. Bus Stop. She was luminous on screen and deeply troubled off it, struggling with addiction, broken relationships, and a profound loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere. On August 4th, 1962, she was found dead in her Brentwood home from an overdose of barbiturates. She was 36 years old. The great irony is that her former husband, Joe DiMaggio, chose Westwood specifically because it was a quiet, out-of-the-way place, far from the madness of Hollywood. That didn't last. In life and in death, the crowds followed Marilyn. DiMaggio, incidentally, arranged for fresh roses to be delivered to her crypt 3 times a week for 20 years. He never remarried. Across the city now, east to Glendale, California, where we enter one of the most extraordinary cemeteries on the planet, Forest Lawn Memorial Park. If you're going to understand celebrity graves, you have to understand Forest Lawn. Its founder, Hubert Eaton, had a vision in 1917. He wanted to create a memorial park that celebrated life rather than mourned death. He filled the grounds with sweeping green lawns, grand statuary, massive reproductions of famous artworks, and buildings that look more like European cathedrals than anything you'd expect in a California suburb. The centerpiece is the Great Mausoleum, a vast cathedral-like structure adorned with stained glass, marble floors, and Renaissance-inspired sculpture. Among its treasures is a massive stained glass recreation of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. And it is here, in this grand setting, that one of Hollywood's most glamorous figures is entombed, Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Her funeral service in 2011 reportedly began 15 minutes late because, as her publicist explained, she had specified in her instructions that she wanted to be fashionably late to her own funeral. Even in death, Elizabeth Taylor was nobody but herself. Taylor won 2 Academy Awards, for Butterfield 8 in 1961 and for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 1966. She was nominated 5 times in all. She starred in some of the biggest films of the 20th century: Giant, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Cleopatra, Suddenly Last Summer, A Place in the Sun. The Cleopatra production alone became one of the most famous and most expensive film shoots in history, nearly bankrupting 20th Century Fox and igniting the affair with Richard Burton that would captivate the tabloids for years. Her violet eyes became the most famous eyes in Hollywood. She was married 8 times to 7 men, including twice to Richard Burton, with whom she had one of the most tempestuous, passionate, and public love affairs in the history of celebrity culture. They fought, they reconciled, they divorced, they remarried, they divorced again. The whole world watched, fascinated. Off-screen, she became a tireless activist for HIV and AIDS research at a time when the disease carried an enormous stigma, and most public figures wouldn't touch the subject. She co-founded AMFAR, the Foundation for AIDS Research, and the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, raising hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of her lifetime. She visited hospitals, lobbied Congress, and used her fame as a weapon against ignorance and indifference. Friends said it was the work she was proudest of. Elizabeth Taylor died from congestive heart failure in March of 2011 at the age of 79. Her resting place within the Great Mausoleum is not accessible to the general public, a fitting final act of privacy for a woman who spent 65 years in the relentless glare of the spotlight. We leave California temporarily and travel to the shores of Lake Erie to Cleveland, Ohio, where one of America's great Victorian-era cemeteries sits on 285 acres of rolling, wooded hillside. Lakeview Cemetery is beautiful in its own right, but nothing quite prepares you for the James A. Garfield Memorial. It is one of the most spectacular presidential tombs in the United States, a massive Romanesque structure built from Ohio sandstone, rising 180 feet into the sky. The exterior features carved stone arches and a tall tower that can be seen from miles around. Inside, the rotunda is breathtaking. Mosaic floors and intricate geometric patterns, stained glass windows depicting scenes from Garfield's life, terracotta friezes, and bas-relief panels showing key moments of his career. Below, in the crypt, the caskets of President Garfield and his wife Lucretia rest in the quiet darkness. James Garfield served 9 terms in the House of Representatives before becoming the 20th President of the United States in 1881. A self-made man, he was born in a log cabin in Orange Township, Ohio, worked as a canal boat driver, a carpenter, and a school teacher before entering politics. He served with distinction as a Union officer during the Civil War, rising to the rank of Major General. His presidency was just 6 months old when tragedy struck. On July 2, 1881, a deranged office seeker named Charles Guiteau shot the president at a Washington train station. Guiteau believed he was owed a diplomatic appointment for his supposed help in Garfield's campaign, and when the appointment never came, he decided that killing the president was God's will. The wound was not immediately fatal, and modern physicians believe Garfield would likely have survived with today's medical knowledge. But this was 1881, and there was little understanding of the importance of sterilization. Doctors probed for the bullet with unsterilized fingers and instruments. Alexander Graham Bell was even called in to try to locate the bullet with an experimental metal detector. It didn't work, possibly because the metal springs in Garfield's mattress interfered with the device. Sepsis and massive infections set in. Garfield lingered for 79 agonizing days, losing more than 80 pounds before dying on September 19, 1881, at the age of 49. His death shocked the nation and directly led to the passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which ended the spoils system that had motivated his assassin. The memorial was completed in 1890, funded by public donations, and it stands today as one of the finest examples of memorial architecture in America. A soaring tribute to a president whose promising tenure was reduced by fate to a footnote of what-ifs. Back to Hollywood now, and to a cemetery that is practically a character in the story of the movie industry. Hollywood Forever Cemetery sits right on Santa Monica Boulevard, directly behind the Paramount Studios lot. Founded in 1899, it has been the final destination for Hollywood's famous and infamous since the silent era. And perhaps the most legendary resident is the man who, in many ways, started it all, the cult of movie star worship. Rudolph Valentino. The Italian-born actor was the original heartthrob of the silver screen, the first true male sex symbol in motion pictures. He sent audiences into a frenzy in The Sheik and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and Blood and Sand. Women swooned. Teenage girls wrote him letters by the thousands. Then, in August of 1926, Valentino was hospitalized with a perforated ulcer that led to peritonitis. He died on August 23rd at the age of 31. The reaction was nothing short of hysterical. Riots broke out outside the funeral home in Manhattan. Thousands of people tried to force their way inside. At least 2 fans reportedly took their own lives in grief. His crypt is inside the Cathedral Mausoleum here at Hollywood Forever. And for decades after his death, a mysterious figure known as the Lady in Black would appear each year on the anniversary of his death and place a single red rose at his tomb. The identity of the original woman was never definitively confirmed, though several people claimed the role over the years. The tradition became part of Hollywood lore. Valentino's resting place remains one of the most visited spots in this cemetery, proof that nearly 100 years later, the original heartthrob still has the power to draw a crowd. Step outside the Cathedral Mausoleum and walk across the grounds of Hollywood Forever, past the reflecting pool and the grand colonnade, and you'll find one of the most elaborate celebrity memorials in the entire cemetery. This is the memorial to Douglas Fairbanks, the undisputed king of Hollywood during the silent era. A large reflecting pool leads to a classical marble sarcophagus set against a backdrop of white marble and ornamental stonework. It's a monument built for royalty. And in the 1920s, that's exactly what Fairbanks was. Fairbanks was the biggest male star of the silent era, the swashbuckling action hero of Robin Hood, the Thief of Baghdad, the Mark of Zorro, and the Three Musketeers. He did many of his own stunts, leaping from balconies and swinging from chandeliers with an athletic grace that made audiences gasp. Off-screen, he married Mary Pickford, and together they became the first power couple of Hollywood, holding court at their Beverly Hills estate, Pickfair, where they entertained everyone from royalty to Albert Einstein. In 1919, Fairbanks, Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith formed United Artists, a revolutionary move that gave artists control over their own films. Fairbanks died of a heart attack in his sleep on December 12, 1939, at the age of 56. His memorial here at Hollywood Forever, with its grand reflecting pool and classical design, is regularly cited as one of the most beautiful cemetery monuments in America. From the glamour of early Hollywood, we travel deep into the American South, to Montgomery, Alabama. Oakwood Cemetery is a historic burial ground spread across gentle green hills with weathered markers dating back to the Civil War. But the most visited grave here has nothing to do with the war. It belongs to Hank Williams, the man many call the greatest country songwriter who ever lived. If you love country music, this is holy ground. Hank Williams recorded songs that are now inseparable from the identity of American country music. I'm so lonesome I could cry. Your cheatin' heart? Hey, good lookin'. I saw the light. Cold, cold heart? Jambalaya. He had 11 #1 country hits before his 30th birthday. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he accomplished all of this in a career that lasted barely 6 years. On New Year's Day 1953, Hank Williams was found dead in the back seat of his Cadillac, being driven to a concert in Canton, Ohio. His heart gave out, weakened by years of drinking, drug use, and a congenital spinal condition that caused him chronic pain. He was 29 years old. His monument here at Oakwood is distinctive and well known among country music fans. Visitors leave guitar picks, flowers, and handwritten notes. Fans treat this spot the way rock fans treat Graceland, as a sacred destination, the final stop on a musical pilgrimage. From the king of country to the father of the nation. We travel now to Mount Vernon, Virginia, the beloved estate of George Washington, set along the banks of the Potomac River about 15 miles south of the capital that bears his name. Washington's tomb is located on the grounds, a simple brick structure set into a hillside, its entrance fronted by an iron gate through which you can see two marble sarcophagi, one for George, one for his wife Martha. The setting is peaceful, shaded by old trees with the quiet river visible in the distance. It is remarkably modest for the most important figure in American history. George Washington was the commander of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, the president of the Constitutional Convention, and the first president of the United States. He is the only president to be unanimously elected by the Electoral College, and it happened twice. He voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, setting a precedent that held for 150 years. Washington died at Mount Vernon on December 14, 1799, from what modern physicians believe was acute epiglottitis, an infection of the throat made catastrophically worse by the medical practices of the day, which included draining nearly half of his blood. He was 67. Congress repeatedly tried to claim his remains for the nation's capital, proposing to place them in a special crypt beneath the Capitol building. But Washington's family honored his wish to remain at Mount Vernon. And so here he stays, along the river he loved, at the plantation he spent his life building. More than 1 million people visit Mount Vernon each year. Our tour continues to the most solemn military burial ground in the United States, Arlington National Cemetery, spread across 600 acres of rolling Virginia hillside just across the Potomac from the monuments of Washington, D.C. Among the more than 400,000 graves marked with identical white headstones, one draws more visitors than any other. The grave of President John F. Kennedy sits on a gentle slope with a sweeping view of the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. It is marked by a simple flat stone of Cape Cod granite bearing his name and the dates 1917 and 1963. The stone is surrounded by an irregular border of rough Cape Cod fieldstones, but what transforms this from a simple grave into one of the most powerful memorial sites in the world is the eternal flame. A gas-powered flame that burns day and night, in rain and snow, at the head of the grave. First, Lady Jacqueline Kennedy requested the flame during the funeral planning, just 2 days after her husband was assassinated in Dallas. She lit it personally during the burial ceremony on November 25, 1963. It has not been extinguished since. Kennedy had visited Arlington just months earlier, in March of 1963, to attend a ceremony at the grave of the unknown soldier. Standing on the hillside, looking out over the Capitol, he reportedly said it was so beautiful he could stay forever. His widow remembered. She chose this spot. JFK was the 35th President of the United States, the youngest man elected to the office, and, until that terrible day in Dallas, a figure who embodied the optimism and energy of a new American generation. He navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis, established the Peace Corps, and challenged the nation to put a man on the moon before the decade was out. His presidency lasted barely 1,000 days, but it left an imprint on the American imagination that endures. He was 46 when he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald's bullets on November 22, 1963, a date that everyone alive at the time can tell you exactly where they were when they heard the news. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was later buried beside him in 1994, as were 2 of their children who died in infancy. Robert F. Kennedy, assassinated in Los Angeles in June of 1968, rests nearby, marked by a simple white cross. The Kennedy gravesite is visited by more than 3 million people a year, making it one of the most visited memorials anywhere in the world. The view from this hillside, Across the river, past the Memorial Bridge to the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, is one of the most beautiful and most meaningful in all of America. From the solemnity of Arlington, we move to a memorial that is every bit as moving but different in character. In Atlanta, Georgia, within the grounds of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park, the tomb of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sits within a long, reflecting pool, a white marble crypt upon a raised brick platform in the center of the water. It's a striking, contemplative design, serene, dignified, and surrounded by the gentle sound of cascading water from the pool's edges. The inscription on the crypt reads words that still resonate across the decades. "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last." Those words, from the closing of his "I Have a Dream" speech delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in August of 1963, are among the most quoted in the English language. Dr. King was the leader of the American Civil Rights Movement, a Baptist minister who preached nonviolent resistance and who, through sheer moral force, changed the laws, the customs, and the conscience of a nation. He led the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, which lasted more than a year and ended with the Supreme Court ruling that segregated buses were unconstitutional. He organized the March on Washington in 1963, where he delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech to 250,000 people. He led the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965, which helped secure the passage of the Voting Rights Act. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 at the age of 35, the youngest man at that time to receive the honor. Throughout it all, he was arrested dozens of times, his home was bombed, he was stabbed once at a book signing, and he lived under constant threat of death. He knew the danger. In his final speech, delivered the night before he was killed, he told a crowd in Memphis, "I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." He was assassinated on April 4, 1968, while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 39 years old. His wife, Coretta Scott King, spent the rest of her life continuing his work and protecting his legacy. She rests beside him, her crypt placed alongside his after her death in 2006. The site draws more than 1 million visitors a year and sits just steps from the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where both King and his father served as pastors. The reflecting pool that surrounds the crypt is a powerful design choice. Water has long been a symbol of peace and renewal, and its gentle sound provides a meditative quality that invites visitors to pause, reflect, and remember. After the weight of history, let's shift to something with a little more sparkle. We travel now to the California desert, to Cathedral City near Palm Springs. Desert Memorial Park is the final resting place of Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, Ol' Blue Eyes, the voice. Francis Albert Sinatra was, by almost any measure, one of the most important entertainers of the 20th century. From "I've Got You Under My Skin" to "My Way," from "Fly Me to the Moon" to "New York, New York," from the tender "In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning" to the triumphant "That's Life." Sinatra's recordings are the soundtrack to a century of American life. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for From Here to Eternity, and he was nominated again for The Man with the Golden Arm. He won multiple Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year and the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He was the king of the Las Vegas stage, the central figure of the Rat Pack alongside Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. He was a friend of presidents and a figure of enormous cultural influence. His grave here at Desert Memorial Park is relatively modest, a flat marker in the ground, not the sort of monument you'd expect for a man of his stature. But visitors have created their own ritual. They leave small bottles of Jack Daniels, his drink of choice, and coins on the marker. There's usually a scattering of flowers as well. Sinatra died of a heart attack on May 14, 1998, at the age of 82. We head north now, all the way up the Pacific coast to Seattle, Washington. Lakeview Cemetery is a beautiful hillside burial ground with sweeping views of the Cascade Mountains, Mount Rainier, and Puget Sound. Among its residents are two members of the same family, and their side-by-side graves are among the most visited in the Pacific Northwest. Bruce Lee, the martial arts legend and film star, rests here beneath a flat red granite marker bearing his name, his dates, and a photograph. Beside him lies his son, Brandon Lee, who died tragically in March of 1993 at the age of 28, when he was accidentally killed by a prop gun malfunction on the set of The Crow. Bruce Lee drew an estimated 10,000 visitors a year to this hillside. Fans leave flowers, fruit, coins, candles, and personal notes at the grave. 3 men from Mongolia once reportedly walked more than 3,000 miles over 7 months just to reach this spot. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco but grew up in Hong Kong, where he became a child actor before returning to the United States as a young man. He revolutionized martial arts cinema with films like Enter the Dragon, Fist of Fury, and The Big Boss, and he was developing an entirely new philosophy of martial arts, Jeet Kune Do, that emphasized fluid adaptability over rigid tradition. Then, in July of 1973, while in Hong Kong preparing for a new film, Lee collapsed and died from cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain believed to have been caused by a reaction to an analgesic. He was 32 years old. The double tragedy of this family, a father and son, both taken young, both in circumstances tinged with shock and disbelief, gives this quiet hillside in Seattle a weight of sorrow that visitors feel the moment they arrive. From Seattle, we cross the Atlantic to Paris, and to one of the most famous cemeteries in the world. Père Lachaise is spread across more than 100 acres of hillside in the 20th arrondissement, a city within a city with winding cobblestone paths, ancient trees, and more than 70,000 burial plots. It is the world's first garden cemetery, established by Napoleon in 1804, and it contains some of the most celebrated names in the history of art, music, literature, and culture. We'll visit 3 remarkable graves here, starting with the one that draws the biggest crowds. Jim Morrison, the charismatic and self-destructive lead singer of The Doors, died in Paris on July 3, 1971, at the age of 27. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, though no autopsy was performed, and the precise circumstances have been debated for decades. Morrison was found dead in the bathtub of his Paris apartment by his girlfriend, Pamela Courson. He'd been living in Paris for several months, trying to escape the pressures of fame and focus on his poetry. His grave at Père Lachaise has become a phenomenon unto itself. Fans cover the surrounding area with graffiti, poems, flowers, empty wine bottles, and tributes of every description. A bust of Morrison was once placed on the grave but was stolen. The current gravestone is a flat marker with a Greek inscription. For years, neighboring grave owners complained about the vandalism and noise, and cemetery officials considered moving Morrison's remains. He stays, though, and the pilgrims keep coming. Mostly young, mostly reverential, drawn to the grave of a man who lived fast, died young, and left behind some of the most haunting rock music ever recorded. Light My Fire, Riders on the Storm, The End, People Are Strange. Morrison's lyrics and Ray Manzarek's eerie keyboard work created a sound that was unlike anything else in rock and roll, and it hasn't dated a day. Morrison was also a published poet, a filmmaker, and by all accounts, one of the most magnetic stage performers of his generation. His grave here in Paris is the 3rd most visited site in the cemetery, after Chopin's and Wilde's, though on some days, it draws the biggest crowd of all. A short walk through the winding paths of Père Lachaise brings us to one of the most visually striking tombs in the entire cemetery, and in all of Europe for that matter. The grave of Oscar Wilde, the Irish playwright and wit who gave the world the importance of being earnest and the picture of Dorian Gray, is impossible to miss. The tomb, designed by the sculptor Jacob Epstein and completed in 1914, is a massive Art Deco winged figure, a sphinx-like flying angel inspired by Assyrian art carved from a single 20-ton block of stone. It's bold, dramatic, and utterly unlike anything else in the cemetery. Wilde died in Paris in November of 1900, penniless and in exile, just 3 years after his release from Reading Jail, where he'd served 2 years of hard labor for gross indecency. He was 46. His reported last words, looking around the cheap room where he was dying, were something along the lines of, "This wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One of us has got to go." For years, admirers would leave lipstick kiss marks all over Epstein's monument, which, while romantic in spirit, caused real damage to the stone. In 2011, a glass barrier was installed around the tomb to protect it. The barrier, predictably, is now covered with lipstick kisses instead. Oscar Wilde, one suspect, would have appreciated the futility of trying to contain passion with glass. Before we leave Père Lachaise, there's one more grave that any lover of music must see. The tomb of Frédéric Chopin is one of the most beautiful pieces of funerary art in the world. It features a sculpture by Jean-Baptiste Clessinger of Euterpe, the Greek muse of music, depicted in mourning. Her head is bowed, her expression sorrowful, and in her hands she cradles a broken lyre. Fresh flowers are almost always present at the base. It's an exquisite memorial, perfectly suited to a composer whose music is both achingly beautiful and shot through with melancholy. Chopin was plagued by poor health throughout his short life, suffering from what is now believed to have been tuberculosis. Born in Poland, he spent most of his adult life in Paris, where he became the toast of the salon circuit, composing nocturnes, etudes, and waltzes of extraordinary refinement and emotional depth. He died in October of 1849 at the age of 39. And here's a detail that's hard to forget. At Chopin's request, his heart was removed from his body after death, preserved in a jar of what is believed to have been cognac, and smuggled into Poland by his sister. It rests today inside a pillar of the Church of the Holy Cross in Warsaw. The rest of Chopin is here, beneath the Mourning Muse, in one of the most visited graves in Paris. From the heart of Paris, we cross the English Channel and drive into the rolling countryside of Northamptonshire, England. Althorpe House, the ancestral estate of the Spencer family, has been in the family since 1508. And since September of 1997, it has been the final resting place of Diana, Princess of Wales. After her death in a car crash in a Paris tunnel on August 31st of that year, at the age of 36, there was enormous public pressure to inter Diana at Westminster Abbey or St. Paul's Cathedral. But the Spencer family chose Althorpe, and they chose a location of extraordinary beauty and symbolism, a small island in the center of an ornamental lake called the Round Oval. The grave sits on the island, accessible only by boat, surrounded by water on all sides. 36 oak trees, one for each year of her life, were planted around the lake's perimeter. A classical memorial temple stands on the shore opposite, where visitors can pay their respects and leave floral tributes. The actual grave on the island is not visible to the public. The water provides both beauty and security, a natural barrier against intrusion. Diana was one of the most photographed and pursued women in the world, hounded by paparazzi from the moment of her engagement to Prince Charles in 1981 until the night she died in that tunnel in Paris. And in death, her family gave her what she so rarely had in life: privacy and peace. The setting is stunning. The lake, the trees, the classical temple reflected in the water. The estate opens to visitors during the summer months, and the memorial temple includes an exhibition dedicated to Diana's life, her charitable work, and the public response to her death, which produced an outpouring of grief unlike anything Britain had seen since the war. More than 1 million bouquets of flowers were laid outside Kensington Palace in the days after she died. The funeral, held at Westminster Abbey and broadcast worldwide, was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people. Elton John performed a reworked version of Candle in the Wind at the service, and it became the best-selling single of all time. Althorpe, with its island grave and its ring of 36 oaks, has become one of the most visited memorial sites in England, a place where the memory of a woman the world called the People's Princess endures in the quietness of the English countryside. We return to the United States now, and to a man whose energy on stage was unlike anything the world had ever seen. James Brown, the godfather of soul, the hardest-working man in show business, died on Christmas Day 2006 from congestive heart failure and pneumonia at the age of 73. His funeral was an event befitting his stature. His body was displayed in a gold-plated casket at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, where tens of thousands filed past to pay their respects. Another public viewing was held in Augusta, Georgia, where he had lived for many years. But his actual burial was delayed for months by legal disputes among family members over his estate. He was eventually interred in a crypt on the grounds of his daughter's property in Beach Island, South Carolina. Brown's career defies easy summary. He essentially invented funk. Songs like I Got You, I Feel Good, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, Living in America, and Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine didn't just top the charts, they changed the rhythmic foundation of popular music. His live performances were legendary for their intensity, precision, and sheer physical exertion. He was one of the first inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. His influence on everyone from Michael Jackson to Prince to hip-hop itself is incalculable. The gold casket at the Apollo was a fitting farewell for a man who always insisted on giving the people a show. From the godfather of soul to the queen of soul. We traveled to Detroit, Michigan, and Woodlawn Cemetery, where Aretha Franklin was laid to rest in August of 2018 in a service that lasted more than 8 hours and was broadcast live on national television. She arrived at her public viewing in a gold-plated casket, and she was dressed in a different outfit for each of her 3 days of viewing, glamorous to the very end. The funeral featured performances and eulogies from Stevie Wonder, Ariana Grande, former President Bill Clinton, Smokey Robinson, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and many others. Aretha Franklin had one of the greatest voices in the history of recorded music. Respect, Natural Woman, Chain of Fools, Think, I Say a Little Prayer. She recorded 18 #1 R&B hits and won 18 Grammy Awards over a career spanning more than 5 decades. She was the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She sang at the inaugurations of Presidents Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. She sang at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. When she opened her mouth, something transcendent came out. A voice that combined the power of gospel with the soul of rhythm and blues and the precision of a musician who knew exactly what she was doing at all times. Aretha died from pancreatic cancer on August 16, 2018, at the age of 76, the same calendar date as it happens, on which Elvis Presley died 41 years earlier. Here at Woodlawn, she rests among other luminaries of Detroit and American culture, including Rosa Parks, the mother of the Civil Rights Movement, whose own grave is in the cemetery's chapel. Woodlawn also holds members of the Ford and Dodge automotive families, reflecting the diverse history of a city that has given the world so much. For lovers of American music and history, this cemetery has become an essential destination. Staying with music, we head south to the Gulf Coast of Texas. Seaside Memorial Park in Corpus Christi is the resting place of Selena Quintanilla-Perez, known to the world simply as Selena. She was called the Queen of Tejano music, and at the time of her death she was on the verge of a massive crossover into the English-language pop mainstream. On March 31, 1995, she was shot and killed at a Days Inn motel by Yolanda Saldivar, the president of her own fan club, who had been embezzling money from Selena's boutiques. Selena was 23 years old. The response was staggering. More than 60,000 people filed past her casket during a public viewing at the Bayfront Convention Center in Corpus Christi. Her death made the front page of newspapers across the country and was mourned across Latin America. George W. Bush, then governor of Texas, declared April 16th Selena Day in the state. Her grave here at Seaside Memorial draws visitors year-round. Fans leave flowers, notes, candles, rosaries, and personal mementos. Some leave letters telling Selena about their own lives, as though she were still listening. A life-size bronze statue of Selena, called the Mirador de la Flor, stands along the Corpus Christi waterfront, looking out over the bay. Jennifer Lopez portrayed her in the 1997 biopic, a role that helped launch Lopez's own career. Lopez has spoken many times about how deeply Selena's story affected her. Selena's music, Bidi Bidi Bom Bom, Dreaming of You, Como la Flor, No Me Queda Más, continues to sell millions, and her posthumous crossover album Dreaming of You debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, making her the first predominantly Spanish-language artist to accomplish that feat. She remains a cultural icon, a symbol of what was possible and what was lost, and her grave here on the Texas coast is visited with the kind of devotion that transcends fandom and becomes something closer to reverence. From the Texas coast to the rolling hills of central Indiana, the small town of Fairmount, population roughly 3,000, sits among farmland and quiet roads, and it seems like the last place you'd find one of the most visited graves of any movie star in the world. But here, in Park Cemetery, lies James Dean. The headstone is relatively simple, polished to a high sheen by generations of visitors who can't help but touch it. Fans come from around the globe, leaving cigarettes, notes, flowers, and lipstick kisses. The grave is often surrounded by mementos. Dean made only 3 films before his death: East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. But in those 3 performances, he captured something so raw and so achingly real about youthful restlessness, alienation, and the desperate need to be understood that he became the defining image of American teenage rebellion. He was nominated posthumously for 2 Academy Awards, for East of Eden and Giant. On September 30th, 1955, driving his silver Porsche 550 Spider to a race in Salinas, California, Dean collided with another car at an intersection near Shalom. He was killed almost instantly. He was 24 years old. His legend only grew after his death. Fairmount holds an annual James Dean Festival every September. The cemetery remains a destination for fans who want to stand in the Indiana wind and pay their respects to a young man who burned so brightly that 3 films were enough to make him immortal. From a young rebel to an old master. We head now to Elmira, New York, and Woodlawn Cemetery, not to be confused with the Woodlawn in the Bronx or the one in Detroit. This particular Woodlawn holds the grave of Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, the man many consider the greatest writer America ever produced. His monument is a substantial marker befitting the father of American literature. Twain gave us The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and some of the sharpest, funniest prose ever put on paper. William Faulkner called him the father of American literature, and Ernest Hemingway said all modern American literature comes from one book, Huckleberry Finn. Twain was born in 1835, the year Halley's Comet made one of its periodic appearances. Late in life, he predicted he would die when the comet returned. "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835, he said. "It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." He was right. Mark Twain died on April 21, 1910, one day after Halley's Comet made its closest approach to Earth. He was 74. His resting place here in Elmira, where his wife's family was from and where he spent many productive summers writing, is a destination for readers and literature lovers from around the world. From America's greatest novelist to its most remarkable founding intellect, we travel to Charlottesville, Virginia, and up the mountain to Monticello, the extraordinary home Thomas Jefferson designed for himself atop an 850-foot summit in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Jefferson is buried in the family cemetery on the grounds, beneath an obelisk he designed himself. And in a characteristically bold move, he wrote his own epitaph, choosing to include only 3 accomplishments from a life overflowing with them. The inscription lists, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Notice what's missing. He didn't mention that he was the 3rd president of the United States, or that he negotiated the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the nation, or that he served as Secretary of State, Vice President, Minister to France, and Governor of Virginia. Those achievements, apparently, didn't make his top 3. Jefferson died on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. By an almost unbelievable coincidence, John Adams, his great friend and rival, died the very same day, reportedly saying, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He didn't know Jefferson had died just hours earlier. Jefferson was 83. His grave beneath the obelisk he designed remains one of the most visited presidential burial sites in America, and Monticello itself draws nearly 500,000 visitors each year. We stay in Virginia and head west to Lexington, a small city in the Shenandoah Valley. On the campus of Washington and Lee University stands the Lee Chapel, a dignified brick building that serves as the final resting place of Robert E. Lee. After the Civil War, Lee accepted the presidency of what was then Washington College and served in that role until his death in 1870 from what modern physicians believe was coronary artery disease, complicated by a possible stroke. He was 63. The chapel, which Lee himself helped plan, houses one of the most famous pieces of commemorative sculpture in America. A recumbent statue of Lee by sculptor Edward Valentine, carved in white marble, depicting the general lying as if asleep on a battlefield cot, in full uniform. The effect is quietly powerful. The great commander at rest, his wars finally over. The Lee family crypt is in the lower level of the chapel, and Lee's beloved horse, Traveler, is buried just outside. The site draws visitors from around the world and remains a place of reflection on one of the most complex and debated figures in American history. Time to lighten things up. We head back to California, to Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills, where Liberace, the most flamboyant entertainer of the 20th century, is interred. Vladzio Valentino Liberace was the highest-paid entertainer in the world during the 1950s and 60s, a classically trained pianist who turned concert performance into a Las Vegas extravaganza. He wore fur-lined capes, jewel-encrusted jackets, sequin tuxedos, and rings on every finger. He played a rhinestone-covered piano. He drove a Rolls-Royce onto the stage. He once appeared in a cape made of $16,000 worth of chinchilla, and it was considered restrained for him. Audiences loved every rhinestone-studded minute of it. Liberace won 2 Emmy Awards, had his own television show for years, and filled concert halls and showrooms well into his 60s. Critics savaged him, but he was famous for his response. "I cried all the way to the bank." He died in February of 1987 from pneumonia related to AIDS at the age of 67. His team initially tried to keep the cause of death private, but it was confirmed by the coroner. His resting place here at Forest Lawn is in a section not publicly accessible, but his legacy, the sheer, unapologetic joy of his showmanship, remains one of the most dazzling chapters in the history of American entertainment. We stay at Forest Lawn, moving now to the Glendale location and its famed Great Mausoleum, where the King of Pop is entombed. Michael Jackson's exact resting place within the Holly Terrace section is in a private area not open to the general public. His funeral in July of 2009 was one of the most watched events in television history. The memorial service at the Staples Center in Los Angeles drew an estimated audience of 2.5 billion people worldwide. Michael Jackson was, by virtually any statistical measure, the biggest pop star who ever lived. Thriller is the best-selling album in history, with estimated sales exceeding 70 million copies. He won 13 Grammy Awards and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Jackson 5, once as a solo artist. His music videos, Thriller, Billie Jean, Beat It, Smooth Criminal, transformed the music video from a promotional clip into an art form. The moonwalk became the most imitated dance move in history. He was an extraordinary dancer, an innovative recording artist, and a performer of breathtaking energy. Jackson died on June 25, 2009, from cardiac arrest caused by an overdose of propofol, an anesthetic that his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had been administering to help him sleep as he prepared for a grueling series of 50 comeback concerts in London. He was 50 years old. Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served 2 years in prison. Jackson's death sent shockwaves around the world. Within hours, the internet nearly broke from the volume of searches for his name. Radio stations played nothing but his music for days. His memorial service at the Staples Center featured performances by Stevie Wonder, Mariah Carey, Lionel Richie, and others, and closed with his daughter Paris, then 11 years old, tearfully saying, "Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine." Jackson's resting place here at Forest Lawn may be hidden from view, but his music is everywhere. On radio stations in Tokyo and taxicabs in Lagos, in dance studios and school talent shows, on the playlists of people who weren't even born when Thriller was released. His legacy is complicated, marked by both extraordinary artistic achievement and profound personal controversy. But the music itself, Billie Jean, Beat It, Thriller, Man in the Mirror, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, that music endures, and it will endure long after the arguments fade. Let's stay at Forest Lawn, Glendale for one of the great love stories of Hollywood. In the Great Mausoleum, side by side, rest Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. Gable was the undisputed king of Hollywood. The rakish smile, the broad shoulders, the pencil mustache. He played Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, the wisecracking reporter who wins Claudette Colbert's heart in It Happened One Night, for which he won the Academy Award, and the rugged adventurer in Mogambo and the Misfits. He was the #1 box office draw in America for years. Lombard was his match in every way, funny, fearless, and famously profane. She was the queen of screwball comedy, the star of My Man Godfrey, 20th Century, and Nothing Sacred. She was one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood by the late 30s. They married in 1939, and by all accounts, it was a true love match. Then came the war. After Pearl Harbor, Lombard threw herself into the war bond effort with her characteristic energy. In January of 1942, she participated in a rally in her home state of Indiana that raised over $2 million. Eager to get home to Gable, she boarded a plane rather than taking the train. The plane crashed into a mountainside near Las Vegas. Everyone on board was killed. Carole Lombard was 33. Clark Gable was devastated. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces, flew combat missions over Germany, and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Friends said he never fully recovered from Lombard's death. When Gable died of a heart attack in November of 1960 at the age of 59, he was placed in the crypt beside hers, together again, the king and his queen. Just down the corridor from the Gable-Lombard crypt, in a restricted section of Forest Lawn, Glendale, rests a man who dreamed bigger than perhaps anyone in the history of American enterprise, Walt Disney. He created Mickey Mouse. He built Disneyland. He pioneered the feature-length animated film with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which skeptics called Disney's Folly until it became the highest-grossing film of its time. He won 22 Academy Awards during his lifetime, still a record for any individual. Fantasia, Pinocchio, Bambi, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, Mary Poppins. The catalog is staggering. Disney was planning his most ambitious project yet, Walt Disney World in Florida, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. He died on December 15, 1966, at the age of 65, before the project could be completed. An urban legend that has persisted for decades claims that Disney had his body cryogenically frozen. This is simply not true. He was cremated, and his ashes are interred here at Forest Lawn in a small private garden area. The marker is modest, remarkably so for a man whose imagination transformed the entertainment industry and whose name is recognized in every country on Earth. Let's leave Forest Lawn and head south to Culver City, California, to Holy Cross Cemetery, a sprawling Catholic burial ground that reads like a casting call for the golden age of Hollywood. Among the most visited graves here belongs to Rita Hayworth, the glamorous star who became one of the defining images of 1940s Hollywood. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, she was the daughter of Spanish and Irish parents and was transformed by the studio system through hair dyeing, electrolysis, and a name change into Rita Hayworth, the love goddess. She danced with Fred Astaire in You Were Never Lovelier and with Gene Kelly in CoverGirl. But it was her performance in Gilda that cemented her legend. That black strapless dress, that slow-motion glove removal, that toss of the hair. It's one of the most iconic images in movie history. Hayworth was married 5 times, including to Orson Welles and to Prince Ali Khan. Later in life, she suffered from Alzheimer's disease, though it took years to receive a correct diagnosis. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, became one of the leading advocates for Alzheimer's research and awareness. Rita Hayworth died in May of 1987 at the age of 68. Continuing down the California coast, we make our way to Newport Beach and Pacific View Memorial Park, a stunning cemetery perched on a bluff high above the Pacific Ocean. This is the resting place of John Wayne, the man who was the Western movie genre made flesh. The Duke starred in more than 170 films, including Stagecoach, The Searchers, Red River, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Quiet Man, True Grit, for which he won the Academy Award, and his final film, The Shootist. For decades, he was the #1 box office draw in America, the embodiment of a particular kind of American masculinity, strong, silent, and sure of himself. Wayne died from stomach cancer on June 11, 1979, at the age of 72. His grave here at Pacific View is a simple marker, modest for a man of his enormous fame. But the setting is magnificent, on a hillside overlooking the Pacific, with the sound of the surf rising from below. For a man who spent his career riding through the vast landscapes of the American West, there's something fitting about spending eternity with the endless blue horizon stretched out before him. We leave the Pacific behind and journey to a very different ocean view, the lush green mountains of St. Ann Parish, Jamaica. In the hills above the village of 9 Mile, the birthplace of Bob Marley, sits the Bob Marley Mausoleum. The structure is modest but colorful, painted in the red, gold, and green of the Rastafari movement, located just steps from the small house where Marley was born and raised. He was buried here in May of 1981 with his guitar beside him, according to his family's wishes. Bob Marley brought reggae to the world. He was more than a musician. He was a political force, a spiritual leader, and a symbol of resistance and unity across racial and national lines. No woman, no cry. One love. Redemption song. Get up, stand up. Buffalo Soldier. His album Legend is the best-selling reggae album in history. He survived an assassination attempt in 1976, 2 days before a peace concert in Kingston, and performed anyway, with bullet wounds still in his arm and chest. Marley died from melanoma on May 11, 1981. The cancer had started as a lesion under his toenail, initially thought to be a soccer injury, and by the time it was properly diagnosed, it had progressed too far for treatment to be effective. It eventually spread to his lungs, liver, and brain. He was 36 years old. On his deathbed in a Miami hospital, his last words to his son Ziggy were reportedly, "Money can't buy life." The mausoleum in 9 Mile is managed by the Marley family and is one of Jamaica's most popular tourist destinations. Visitors are led through the small wooden house where Marley grew up, shown the single bed he later made famous in song, and taken to the mausoleum itself. Every February, Jamaica celebrates Bob Marley Week with concerts, sporting events, and cultural celebrations across the island. His music, joyful, defiant, spiritual, and deeply humane, continues to sell millions of records a year, making him one of the best-selling artists in history and, along with Elvis, one of the few musicians whose grave has become a genuine international pilgrimage destination. Back in the United States, we travel to Louisville, Kentucky, and Cave Hill Cemetery, one of the great Victorian garden cemeteries of the country. Here, beneath a striking memorial, rests the man who told the world he was the greatest, and then spent his entire career proving it. Muhammad Ali, born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. right here in Louisville, Ali won Olympic gold in Rome in 1960 at the age of 18. 4 years later, he shocked the world by defeating the seemingly invincible Sonny Liston to become heavyweight champion. He was 22. What followed was one of the most extraordinary careers in the history of sports. The Thrilla in Manila, the Rumble in the Jungle, the fight of the century against Joe Frazier. Ali danced, he stung, he talked, and he won. But he was more than a boxer. He refused induction into the Army during the Vietnam War on religious and moral grounds, was stripped of his title, and was banned from boxing for 3 years during the prime of his career. The Supreme Court eventually reversed his conviction in a unanimous decision. It was a stand that cost him millions of dollars and years of peak athletic performance, and it made him one of the most admired people on the planet. Sports Illustrated named him the Sportsman of the Century. He lit the Olympic cauldron at the 1996 Atlanta Games, his trembling hands holding the torch steady enough to ignite a flame that symbolized perseverance and courage. Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1984 and spent the last 3 decades of his life as a global ambassador, appearing at events, meeting with world leaders, and lending his name and presence to humanitarian causes. He visited hospitals, attended fundraisers, and traveled to war zones. His hands trembled, but his spirit never wavered. He died on June 3, 2016, at the age of 74. His funeral in Louisville drew thousands. People lined the streets for miles as the hearse drove through the city where he'd grown up. Former President Bill Clinton delivered a eulogy. Billy Crystal, who had famously impersonated Ali for years, spoke with deep emotion, telling the crowd that Ali was still the most perfect, the most beautiful, the most courageous human being I have ever known. His grave here at Cave Hill has become a place where fans of boxing, of civil rights, and of sheer human courage come to pay tribute to a man who really was the greatest. From the greatest to another kind of greatness. We head to Springfield, Illinois, and Oak Ridge Cemetery, home to one of the grandest presidential memorials in the country, the Lincoln Tomb. The structure is a soaring edifice of granite, topped by a 117-foot obelisk that can be seen from across the city. A large bronze bust of Lincoln, by sculptor Gutzon Borglum, the same artist who designed Mount Rushmore, stands at the entrance. Its nose has been rubbed to a brilliant shine by countless visitors who believe touching it brings good luck. Inside the monument, a series of corridors lined with bronze reproductions of famous Lincoln statues leads to the burial chamber, where a massive red granite marker indicates where the 16th president is interred. Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, and 3 of their 4 sons are also buried here. Abraham Lincoln held the nation together through its bloodiest war, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and gave the Gettysburg Address, 272 words that redefined what America was supposed to mean. He was, by almost universal consensus, the greatest president the country has ever produced. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater on the evening of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. He died the following morning, across the street at the Peterson House, at the age of 56. His funeral train traveled 1,700 miles from Washington to Springfield, stopping in cities along the route so millions of Americans could pay their respects. The tomb, funded by public donations totaling roughly $180,000, was completed in 1874 and has been renovated several times since. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1960 and remains one of the most visited sites in the state of Illinois. Visitors still rub the nose of the bronze bust at the entrance for luck, a tradition that has given Lincoln's nose a golden sheen against the dark patina of the rest of the sculpture. After the solemnity of Lincoln, let's head to a memorial that's just plain spectacular. Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City, California, is home to one of the most visually stunning cemetery monuments in the United States, the Al Jolson Memorial. If you've driven the 405 freeway near Fox Hills, you may have noticed it. A massive white marble structure high on a hillside, visible from the road. The memorial consists of 6 towering marble columns supporting a domed canopy, overlooking a cascading waterfall that drops 75 feet into a large reflecting pool. At the center stands a bronze statue of Jolson in his signature pose, down on one knee, arms outstretched, as if reaching for the audience one last time. Al Jolson was one of the biggest entertainers of the early 20th century. He starred in The Jazz Singer in 1927, the first feature-length motion picture with synchronized dialogue, which effectively ended the silent film era. The very first words spoken in a feature film, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet," were his. Jolson was an electrifying stage performer, a vaudeville and Broadway star who packed theaters for decades. He died of a heart attack on October 23, 1950, at the age of 64, shortly after returning from a trip to entertain troops during the Korean War. His memorial here at Hillside was dedicated in 1951 and reportedly cost over $75,000, an enormous sum in that era. It remains one of the most photographed and iconic cemetery monuments in America. From spectacle to subtlety. We leave California and travel to the village of Corsier-sur-Vevey on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland, where the little tramp sleeps. Charlie Chaplin, the most famous man in the world during the 1920s, the creator of some of the most beautiful, funny, and heartbreaking films ever made, is buried in a quiet cemetery far from the Hollywood that made him a legend. Chaplin moved to Switzerland in 1953 after being effectively barred from re-entering the United States during the Red Scare when his political views were called into question. He never returned to live in America, though he came back once in 1972 to accept an honorary Academy Award. The ovation he received, 12 unbroken minutes of applause and tears, remains the longest standing ovation in Oscar history. Chaplin gave us The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, and The Great Dictator. He wrote, directed, produced, starred in, composed the music for, and sometimes even edited his own films. He was, quite simply, one of the most important artists of the 20th century. He died on Christmas Day 1977, at the age of 88. In March of 1978, in a bizarre twist worthy of one of his films, Chaplin's coffin was stolen from the cemetery by two men, a Bulgarian and a Pole, who attempted to hold it for ransom. They demanded 600,000 Swiss francs from Chaplin's widow, Una. She refused, reportedly saying her husband would have found the whole thing ridiculous. Swiss police set up a sting operation, tapping phone lines and monitoring phone booths, and the two men were eventually arrested. The coffin was recovered 11 weeks later, buried in a cornfield about 10 miles from the cemetery. It was reburied in a vault reinforced with concrete to prevent any future theft. Una O'Neill Chaplin, the daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill, who married Charlie when she was 18 and he was 54, rests beside him. Their marriage lasted 34 years, until his death. His grave is marked by a simple headstone in a quiet Swiss churchyard. His story, from the poverty of Victorian London to the heights of worldwide fame to exile in Switzerland to the absurd theft of his own coffin, reads like a screenplay he might have written himself, equal parts comedy, tragedy, and redemption. We cross back over the Atlantic to Tennessee, to Hendersonville Memory Gardens, just northeast of Nashville. Here, side by side, rest Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash, the first couple of country music. Their graves are modest, near the lakefront property where they lived together for more than 3 decades. Johnny Cash, the man in black, was one of the towering figures of American music. I Walk the Line, Ring of Fire, Folsom Prison Blues, A Boy Named Sue. He sold more than 90 million records worldwide. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the Gospel Music Hall of Fame, one of only a handful of people in all three. June Carter Cash was a formidable artist in her own right, descended from the legendary Carter family, the so-called first family of country music. Maybelle Carter, June's mother, was one of the most important figures in the history of country music, and June grew up performing. She was a singer, actress, comedian, and songwriter who co-wrote Ring of Fire. The song was inspired by falling in love with Johnny Cash, and the ring of fire she described was the burning intensity of that love. She won a Grammy for her album Press On late in her career. The two married in 1968, and their relationship, passionate, tumultuous, and ultimately redemptive, became one of the great love stories in American music. June is widely credited with helping Johnny overcome his addiction to amphetamines and barbiturates, though the road to sobriety was long and winding. June died on May 15, 2003, from complications following heart surgery. She was 73, Johnny was inconsolable. In the months after her death, he threw himself into recording with a fierce urgency, as though he knew his time was short. He recorded covers of songs like Hurt by Nine Inch Nails. The haunting music video, featuring frail footage of the aging Cash, became one of the most acclaimed and heartbreaking music videos ever made. He died less than 4 months after June, on September 12, 2003, at the age of 71, from complications of diabetes. Their side-by-side graves here in Hendersonville have become a pilgrimage site for country fans from around the world, and for anyone who believes that love, real, hard-won, imperfect love, can last beyond the last breath. From Tennessee, we drive south into Texas, to the city of Lubbock and the city of Lubbock Cemetery. Here lies Buddy Holly, the young Texan who helped invent rock and roll and whose death became known as the day the music died. Holly's career lasted barely 18 months, but in that time he recorded some of the most influential songs in the history of popular music. Peggy Sue, That'll Be the Day, Oh Boy, Ray Vaughan, Not Fade Away. He was among the first artists inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. On February 3, 1959, after a concert in Clear Lake, Iowa, Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson boarded a small charter plane rather than endure another long bus ride in the freezing Midwest winter. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was just 21 and not certified for instrument flying. The plane crashed in a cornfield shortly after takeoff, in snowy conditions and near zero visibility. All 3 musicians and the pilot were killed instantly. Holly was 22 years old. His pregnant wife, Maria Elena, learned of his death from the radio. She suffered a miscarriage shortly afterward, and for the rest of her life, she has urged expectant mothers not to hear bad news through media broadcasts. Don McLean immortalized the tragedy in his 1971 song, American Pie, calling February 3, 1959, "The Day the Music Died," a phrase that entered the American vocabulary permanently. Holly's grave here in Lubbock is marked by a headstone, and fans leave guitar picks, flowers, and handwritten notes. The city named a street after him, built a statue in his honor, and hosts an annual Buddy Holly Center that preserves his legacy. For a career that lasted barely a year and a half, the impact was seismic. The Beatles took their name partly in tribute to Holly's crickets, and everyone from Bob Dylan to the Rolling Stones has cited him as a formative influence. Staying in Texas, we head to Dallas and Laurel Land Memorial Park. Here rests Stevie Ray Vaughan, a man widely considered one of the greatest guitar players who ever lived. Vaughan was a blues and rock guitarist from Austin, Texas, whose blistering emotional playing revived mainstream interest in blues music during the 1980s. His debut album, Texas Flood, was released in 1983 and announced the arrival of a singular talent. He won 6 Grammy Awards over the course of his career. His guitar playing, fierce, soulful, and technically dazzling, drew comparisons to Jimi Hendrix. On August 27, 1990, Vaughan performed at a concert in East Troy, Wisconsin, alongside Eric Clapton, Robert Cray, and Buddy Guy. After the show, he boarded a helicopter that flew into dense fog and crashed into a ski hill. Vaughan was 35. His grave here at Laurel Land features a monument that fans travel great distances to visit, leaving guitar picks, flowers, and notes. For guitarists making pilgrimages through Texas, this is a mandatory stop. From Texas, we fly to New York and the borough of Queens. Flushing Cemetery is a quiet, well-kept burial ground that holds one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, Pops. The man who virtually invented jazz trumpet playing, whose gravelly voice and irrepressible joy gave us What a Wonderful World, Hello, Dolly, and West End Blues. Armstrong grew up in poverty in New Orleans, learning cornet at a juvenile detention home. He went on to become the most famous jazz musician on the planet, a global ambassador for American music, and the owner of one of the most recognizable faces and smiles in the world. Armstrong died of a heart attack on July 6, 1971, at the age of 69, at his modest home in Corona, Queens, now a museum. His grave here at Flushing Cemetery is just a few miles from that home. and Lucille, his fourth wife and the great love of his later life, rests beside him. Jazz fans from around the world come to pay their respects to a man who took the music of the streets and made it the music of the world. Let's shift from jazz to conquest. We travel to Paris once more, this time to the left bank of the Seine, and the great military complex of Les Invalides. Beneath the gilded dome of the Dôme des Invalides lies one of the most spectacular tombs in the world, the tomb of Napoleon Bonaparte. The emperor's remains rest in a massive sarcophagus of red quartzite from Finland, set into a circular open crypt below the dome floor. The sarcophagus sits on a base of green granite from the Vosges Mountains, surrounded by 12 victory figures representing Napoleon's greatest military campaigns. 12 colossal relief panels by sculptor James Pradier surround the crypt. It took 20 years to complete, and the effect is one of overwhelming grandeur. Napoleon reshaped the map of Europe, created the Napoleonic Code, the basis for much of modern Western civil law, and fought a series of wars that spanned 2 decades before his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. He was exiled to the remote South Atlantic island of St. Helena, where he spent his last 6 years dictating his memoirs and growing increasingly ill. He died in May of 1821, most likely from stomach cancer, at the age of 51. His remains were returned to France in 1840 in a grand ceremonial procession that drew millions to the streets of Paris. The ship bearing his coffin was met at the mouth of the Seine and carried upriver to Paris, where the cortege passed beneath the Arc de Triomphe, the monument Napoleon himself had commissioned, before proceeding to Les Invalides. The tomb was designed by architect Louis Visconti and completed in 1861. To see it today is to understand what it means to bury a man as if he were a god. The sheer scale of the sarcophagus, the circle of victory figures, the gilded dome overhead. It is funerary architecture on a level that most of the world has never attempted and could never afford. For all his flaws, and there were many, Napoleon remains one of the most consequential figures in Western history, and his tomb is one of the most visited sites in all of Paris. From an emperor to a duke, we return to New York and the Bronx, to Woodlawn Cemetery, one of the grandest burial grounds in the country. Woodlawn is a National Historic Landmark spread across 400 acres of rolling terrain, its landscape dotted with elaborate mausoleums, Gothic Revival monuments, and ornate Victorian statuary. The cemetery reads like a who's who of New York history: Fiorello LaGuardia, Nellie Bly, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and many more. But we're here for one man, Edward Kennedy Ellington, Duke Ellington. The Duke led his orchestra for nearly 50 years, composing more than 1,000 pieces from "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing" to "Take the A Train," to the sophisticated orchestral suites that elevated jazz from dance music to a fine art. He won 13 Grammy Awards, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Nixon, and performed for every president from Coolidge to Nixon. Ellington died from lung cancer and pneumonia in May of 1974 at the age of 75. 12,000 mourners attended his funeral at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. His resting place here at Woodlawn sits among some of the most magnificent funerary architecture in America, a king among monuments. We leave the United States once more and travel to Stratford-upon-Avon in the English county of Warwickshire. The medieval Holy Trinity Church sits on the banks of the River Avon, its spire rising above the trees, and inside, in the chancel near the altar, lies the grave of William Shakespeare. The most celebrated playwright in the history of the English language rests beneath a plain stone slab set into the floor. Carved into the stone is a famous curse: "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." That curse has apparently worked. Unlike countless other historical remains in English churches, Shakespeare's bones have never been disturbed. A painted bust of the playwright, created shortly after his death, looks down from the wall above, pen in hand. Shakespeare died on April 23, 1616, at the age of 52. The cause of death is unknown. What is known is that he left behind 37 plays that encompass the full range of human experience: tragedy, comedy, love, ambition, jealousy, revenge, and redemption. Thousands of visitors from every corner of the world file through Holy Trinity each year to stand before this simple stone, and perhaps to wonder how one man from one small English town could have understood so much. Back across the Atlantic we go, back to the Bronx, back to Woodlawn Cemetery. Here, amid the elaborate monuments and Gothic mausoleums of New York's wealthiest families, rests Irving Berlin, the man who wrote the soundtrack to America. Born Israel Berlin in what is now Belarus in 1888, he came to the United States as a child, growing up in poverty on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He taught himself to play the piano and went on to write an estimated 1,500 songs over a career spanning more than 6 decades. God Bless America, White Christmas, There's No Business Like Show Business, Puttin' on the Ritz, Cheek to Cheek, Easter Parade, Blue Skies. His song, White Christmas, recorded by Bing Crosby, remains the best-selling single of all time. Berlin composed the scores for 19 Broadway shows and 18 Hollywood films. He couldn't read music. He could play piano in only one key, F sharp, and he used a custom-built piano with a lever that mechanically transposed the keys. Irving Berlin lived to be 101 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep in September of 1989. For the last several decades of his life, he was largely reclusive, living in a townhouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and rarely venturing out. But his songs never stopped being sung. God Bless America is performed at baseball stadiums across the country during the 7th-inning stretch. White Christmas returns every holiday season with the certainty of snow. There's No Business Like Show Business remains the unofficial anthem of Broadway. Jerome Kern once said of Berlin, Irving Berlin has no place in American music. He is American music. He rests here at Woodlawn, a boy who arrived at Ellis Island unable to speak a word of English, who never learned to read a note of music, and who went on to write the songs that defined a century. That's a story worthy of one of his own compositions, and quite possibly the most American story ever told. From New York, we traveled to the quiet Swiss countryside, to the village of Tolochenaz, near Lausanne. In the small cemetery attached to the village church, among modest headstones and well-tended flower beds, lies Audrey Hepburn. The actress who personified elegance and grace, who could make you fall in love with a glance and break your heart with a whisper, chose to spend her final years and her eternity far from the glitz of Hollywood. Hepburn won the Academy Award for her very first major role in Roman Holiday, and went on to star in Sabrina, Funny Face, Breakfast at Tiffany's, My Fair Lady, Wait Until Dark, and Charade. She was one of the few performers to achieve EGOT status, winning an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award over the course of her career. But it was her work off-screen that may have mattered most to her. After largely retiring from acting, she devoted herself to UNICEF as a goodwill ambassador, traveling to impoverished regions of the world, Ethiopia, Sudan, Central America, Bangladesh, to advocate for children's health and nutrition. Audrey Hepburn died from appendiceal cancer in January of 1993 at the age of 63. Her grave is modest, a flat stone in a Swiss churchyard surrounded by flowers. She chose to live far from Hollywood, in the countryside she loved. Visitors leave personal notes and flowers at the grave, paying tribute to a woman who was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the camera. We return to California one more time, to Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills, where we find the grave of Bette Davis. The actress was a force of nature, fierce, dynamic, uncompromising, and willing to be ugly on screen in an era when most leading ladies aspired to nothing but glamour. She was the first performer to accumulate 10 Academy Award nominations for acting, and she won twice. For Dangerous in 1935 and for Jezebel in 1938. Her other legendary performances include All About Eve, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, The Letter, and Dark Victory. She served as the first female president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and fought the studio system for creative control. Bette Davis died from breast cancer on October 6, 1989, at the age of 81 in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. She had been on her way to the San Sebastian Film Festival in Spain, where she was to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. But she became too ill to continue. Her remains were returned to Forest Lawn. The epitaph she chose for herself is as bold and direct as her performances. She did it the hard way. It might be the best epitaph in all of Hollywood. Nearby at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills rests James Stewart, the lanky, drawling actor who became one of America's most beloved movie stars. Today, he is probably best remembered for playing George Bailey in Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, the Christmas classic that is now as much a part of the holiday as eggnog and mistletoe. Stewart won the Academy Award for The Philadelphia Story and was nominated 4 more times, for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, Harvey, and Anatomy of a Murder. He was a favorite of Alfred Hitchcock, starring in 4 of the master's finest films: Rear Window, Vertigo, Rope, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. He was also a genuine war hero, joining the Army Air Corps before Pearl Harbor, eventually flying 20 combat missions as a bomber pilot over Nazi-occupied Europe and rising to the rank of Brigadier General in the Air Force Reserve. Stewart died in July of 1997 from a pulmonary embolism at the age of 89. He rests here next to his wife Gloria, who predeceased him by 3 years, on the grounds of a cemetery overlooking the Hollywood he helped define. Of all the actors in the Golden Age, Jimmy Stewart was the one audiences trusted most, because he seemed like one of them. Back at Forest Lawn. Glendale now, in the gardens of memory, behind locked gates, rests Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, and one of the most powerful women in the history of Hollywood. Pickford was the biggest female movie star of the silent era, the most famous woman in the world during the 19-teens and 20s. She was also one of the shrewdest business minds in the industry. She helped pioneer the art of acting for the camera, negotiated a salary of $10,000 a week by 1916, an almost inconceivable figure for any performer at the time, co-founded United Artists in 1919, and was a founding member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1930 for Coquette, and retired from acting a few years later, but she remained influential behind the scenes for decades. Mary Pickford died from a cerebral hemorrhage in 1979 at the age of 87. Her biographer, Eileen Whitfield, titled her biography of Pickford The Woman Who Made Hollywood, and the title is not an exaggeration. Still here at Forest Lawn, Glendale, in the Freedom Mausoleum, we find Nat King Cole. His voice, warm, smooth, intimate, like velvet, was one of the most distinctive in the history of American popular music. Cole first made his name as a jazz pianist, leading the King Cole Trio in the 1940s, before transitioning into a phenomenally successful solo singing career. Unforgettable. Mona Lisa. The Christmas Song. Nature Boy. Love. These recordings are part of the permanent American Songbook. Cole also made history as the first African-American man to host his own national television variety show in 1956. The show struggled to find national sponsors because of racial prejudice. Advertisers were afraid of alienating white Southern audiences. Despite critical praise and decent ratings, the show was canceled after about a year. Cole reportedly said, "Madison Avenue is afraid of the dark." He continued to perform and record prolifically until lung cancer, he was a heavy smoker, cut his career short. Nat King Cole died in February of 1965 at the age of 45. Years later, his daughter Natalie recorded a technological duet with his voice on a new version of Unforgettable, combining their vocals through studio wizardry. The result won 7 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Album of the Year, introducing a new generation to the magic of her father's voice. Not far from Cole, also at Forest Lawn, Glendale, rests one of the most iconic figures of the Golden Age, Humphrey Bogart. Here's looking at you, kid. Bogart was the tough, world-weary star of Casablanca. the Maltese Falcon, the Big Sleep, and the African Queen, for which he won the Academy Award. The American Film Institute named him the greatest male screen legend of all time. He defined a kind of masculinity, quiet, sardonic, and deeply romantic beneath the hard exterior, that remains compelling to this day. Off-screen, he married 4 times. His final marriage to Lauren Bacall, 25 years his junior and his co-star in To Have and Have Not, became one of Hollywood's great love stories. They were inseparable until his death from esophageal cancer in January of 1957 at the age of 57. According to family lore, Bacall placed a small gold whistle in the urn with his ashes, a reference to her famous line from their first film together. "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." His remains are interred here at Forest Lawn, in the Columbarium of Eternal Light. We leave California behind now and head east to Jamestown, New York, a small city in the southwestern part of the state. Lakeview Cemetery here is the final resting place of Lucille Ball, the red-headed queen of American television comedy and one of the most recognized faces of the 20th century. Lucy was the star, creator, and driving force behind I Love Lucy, the groundbreaking sitcom that ran from 1951 to 1957 and pioneered the 3-camera setup, the live studio audience, and the concept of the rerun. She was the first woman to run a major Hollywood production studio, Desilu Productions, which went on to produce Mission Impossible and Star Trek, among other programs. She won 4 Emmy Awards and remained a television fixture for decades. Ball died from an acute aortic aneurysm on April 26, 1989, at the age of 77. She was originally interred at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, but in 2002, at her family's request, her remains were moved here to her hometown of Jamestown. The city celebrates Lucille Ball every August with a comedy festival in her honor, drawing comedians and fans from across the country. Coming home to Jamestown was the right ending. Lucy, for all her fame, never forgot where she came from. From upstate New York, we travel back to the Bronx for a final visit to Woodlawn Cemetery. Here, among the elaborate monuments and grand mausoleums, rests Celia Cruz, the Queen of Salsa. Born in Havana, Cuba, Cruz became one of the most celebrated performers of Latin music in the 20th century. Her powerful contralto voice, her flamboyant stage costumes, and her exuberant personality made her a global star. She recorded more than 70 albums and won multiple Grammy and Latin Grammy Awards. She left Cuba after Castro's revolution and never returned, becoming a symbol of the Cuban exile community and a beloved figure throughout Latin America and the world. Her signature catchphrase was "Azúcar," sugar, and audiences would shout it back to her at every concert. Cruz died from brain cancer in July of 2003 at the age of 77. Her funeral became a binational event. In Miami, tens of thousands lined the streets for hours as her casket passed through Little Havana and past the Freedom Tower, a symbol of Cuban exile. Then her body was flown to New York, where another massive crowd gathered as her casket was taken through the streets of Washington Heights and the Bronx before arriving at St. Patrick's Cathedral for a funeral mass. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything the Latin music world had ever seen. She rests here at Woodlawn among distinguished company: Duke Ellington, Irving Berlin, Miles Davis, the Queen of Salsa in one of America's grandest cemeteries. Her headstone reportedly bears the inscription "No Lors, Ya No Lors," which means "Don't cry anymore." Fittingly, lyrics from one of her own songs. We head back to Hollywood for one last stop at Hollywood Forever Cemetery because there's a memorial here we haven't visited, and it's one of the most unusual and visually striking pieces of cemetery art in America. A large bronze statue depicts a man in jeans and a t-shirt, legs planted wide, playing a Mosrite guitar with fierce concentration. This is the memorial to Johnny Ramone. Born John Cummings, Johnny Ramone was the guitarist and co-founder of the Ramones, the band widely credited with launching the punk rock movement. Their 1976 debut album, 14 songs in under 30 minutes, was a manifesto against the bloated excess of 70s rock. Blitzkrieg Bop, I Want to Be Sedated, Sheena is a punk rocker. Rockaway Beach. The Ramones never had a top 40 hit during their active years, but their influence was immeasurable. They inspired the Sex Pistols, The Clash, Green Day, and virtually every punk and alternative rock band that followed. The Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2002. Johnny died from prostate cancer in September of 2004 at the age of 55. His memorial statue was unveiled in a ceremony attended by friends including Eddie Vedder, Rob Zombie, and Lisa Marie Presley. It has become one of the most photographed monuments at Hollywood forever, a permanent salute to punk rock, standing defiantly among the graves of silent film stars and Golden Age legends. Let's leave Los Angeles and head to the Black Hills of South Dakota, to the old mining town of Deadwood. Mount Moriah Cemetery clings to a steep hillside overlooking the town, its wooden headboards and iron markers battered by a century and a half of harsh prairie winds. And here, at the top of the hill, lies one of the most legendary figures of the American frontier, Wild Bill Hickok. James Butler Hickok was a scout, a lawman, a gambler, and the fastest draw anyone in the West had ever seen. He served as a Union scout and spy during the Civil War, worked as a marshal in several frontier towns, and became a national celebrity through dime novels and newspaper accounts of his exploits. On August 2, 1876, while playing poker in a saloon in Deadwood, Hickok was shot in the back of the head by a drifter named Jack McCall. Hickok was holding a pair of aces and a pair of eights, a hand that has been known ever since as the dead man's hand. He was 39. McCall was tried, convicted, and hanged for the murder. Beside Hickok's grave on the hillside rests another legend of the Old West, Martha Jane Canary, better known as Calamity Jane. A frontierswoman, scout, and raconteur known for her sharpshooting and her tall tales. She requested to be buried next to Hickok. Whether they were ever romantically involved is hotly debated by historians. Some say they were. Some say Calamity Jane's claims were part of the mythology she carefully constructed around herself. But here they are, side by side, two icons of the frontier, forever overlooking the town where Wild Bill played his last hand. Mount Moriah itself is well worth the climb. The views of Deadwood and the surrounding Black Hills are spectacular, and the cemetery is full of the rough wooden markers and iron crosses of the men and women who came west looking for gold and found something rather different. From the Wild West to the English countryside. We travel now to the small village of Bladon in Oxfordshire, England. In the churchyard of St. Martin's Church, just outside the gates of Blenheim Palace, the magnificent estate where he was born, lies Winston Churchill. His grave is remarkably, almost shockingly, simple. A flat stone slab bearing only his name, a cross, and his dates of birth and death, surrounded by a low chain railing. It sits in the family plot, alongside his wife Clementine, his parents, and several siblings. The contrast is staggering. This was the man who served as Prime Minister during the darkest days of World War II, who rallied a battered and terrified nation with some of the most powerful oratory in the history of the English language. We shall fight on the beaches. Their finest hour. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He served in the military in 4 wars. He painted. He built brick walls for relaxation. Churchill died on January 24, 1965, at the age of 90, exactly 70 years to the day after his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, had died. His state funeral was the largest in British history up to that point, attended by representatives from more than 110 nations. The funeral procession carried his coffin through London on a gun carriage, past hundreds of thousands of mourners. As the funeral barge carried his coffin along the Thames, the cranes of the London Docklands dipped in salute, a spontaneous gesture from the dock workers who decided on their own to honor the man who had seen them through the Blitz. It was one of the most moving moments of the day, and yet here he rests, in a quiet village churchyard under a plain stone. It is, somehow, perfectly British. The absolute refusal to boast, even in death, even when you've earned it more than anyone. We return to California, Forest Lawn, Glendale, one last time, because we haven't yet paid our respects to one of the most important figures in the history of American music, Sam Cooke, the man who gave us A Change Is Gonna Come, one of the most powerful and prophetic songs of the Civil Rights era, and You Send Me, one of the purest pop love songs ever recorded, is entombed here. Cooke was a pioneer of soul music. He took the passion and fire of gospel. He'd been the lead singer of the Soul Stirrers, one of the greatest gospel groups of the 50s, and channeled it into popular music, creating something entirely new. He was also a brilliant businessman, one of the first black artists to found his own record label, SR Records, and his own publishing company, giving him a degree of control over his music and his finances that was nearly unheard of at the time. He understood, decades before it became common wisdom, that the real money in music was in the publishing rights, not just the performance. In December of 1964, Cooke was shot and killed by the manager of a motel in South Los Angeles under circumstances that remain controversial and deeply debated to this day. The official ruling was justifiable homicide, but many of those closest to Cooke, including his friend Muhammad Ali and his manager Alan Klein, publicly expressed doubts about the official account. He was 33 years old. His funeral at Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Los Angeles drew thousands, including Ray Charles, who reportedly wept uncontrollably at the casket. The song Cooke had recorded just weeks before his death, A Change Is Gonna Come, was released posthumously and became one of the defining anthems of the civil rights movement. Inspired in part by Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, the song's sweeping orchestration and Cooke's aching vocal performance captured the pain and hope of an entire people fighting for their dignity. Rolling Stone has called it one of the greatest songs ever recorded. Barack Obama quoted it in his victory speech on the night he was elected president. Sam Cooke rests here at Forest Lawn, far from the soul food restaurants and gospel churches of the south side of Chicago where he first learned to sing, but his voice, smooth, powerful, and unmistakably human, has never stopped reaching people. Let's make our way south now to one of the most beautiful and atmospheric cemeteries in the United States. Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia was made famous by the book and film Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. But it was a destination long before that. Located on a bluff overlooking the Wilmington River, Bonaventure is draped in curtains of Spanish moss, its pathways shaded by massive live oaks whose branches form natural canopies overhead. Victorian monuments, iron fences, and marble angels populate the grounds. It is, quite simply, one of the most photographed cemeteries in America. Among the notable people buried here is Johnny Mercer, one of the greatest songwriters in the history of American popular music. Mercer wrote the lyrics to more than 1,500 songs: Moon River, That Old Black Magic, Accentuate the Positive, Days of Wine and Roses, Autumn Leaves, Something's Gotta Give, and dozens more that have become standards. He co-founded Capitol Records and won 4 Academy Awards for Best Original Song. Johnny Mercer grew up in Savannah, and he was buried here in 1976 after dying from a brain tumor at the age of 66. His grave in this hauntingly beautiful cemetery, moss hanging from the oaks, the river murmuring in the distance, feels like a scene from one of his own songs. Mercer was a Savannah boy through and through. He was born here, grew up swimming in the tidal creeks and fishing off the docks. And though he spent most of his career in New York and Hollywood, he never lost his love for the Lowcountry. His lyrics have a quality of warmth and gentle nostalgia that may well owe something to these surroundings. Moon River, the song he wrote with Henry Mancini for Breakfast at Tiffany's, won the Academy Award in 1962, and Mercer reportedly said it was inspired by the Back River near his childhood home. The opening words, Moon River, wider than a mile, could describe any number of the wide tidal rivers that wind through the marshes around Savannah. Coming back here to rest beneath the oaks and the Spanish moss was the most natural thing in the world. From Savannah, we head north to Stratford, Connecticut and Putnam Cemetery, where one of the greatest showmen in American history rests. Phineas Taylor Barnum, P.T. Barnum, founded Barnum and Bailey Circus, which he called the greatest show on earth. Before the circus, he ran the American Museum in Manhattan, an enormously popular attraction that drew millions of visitors with its menagerie of curiosities, oddities, and live entertainments. He promoted the career of Charles Stratton, the diminutive performer known as General Tom Thumb, making him one of the most famous entertainers in the world. He brought the Swedish opera star Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, to America for a concert tour in 1850 that became one of the greatest promotional coups in entertainment history. Barnum had never actually heard Lind sing before booking her. He simply knew the hype alone would sell tickets. It did. Barnum was a genius of promotion, spectacle, and the art of getting people to pay attention. Whether or not he actually coined the phrase, "there's a sucker born every minute," and most historians now believe it was said by a rival, not Barnum himself, the expression has been permanently attached to his name, which is itself a testament to his gift for making things stick in the public imagination. He also served in the Connecticut State Legislature and as mayor of Bridgeport, where he was a vocal opponent of slavery. Barnum died in April of 1891 at the age of 80. On his deathbed, he reportedly asked to see one of the evening newspapers, not to read the news, but to check his circus's box office receipts. His monument here at Putnam Cemetery is substantial, and the cemetery grounds, which Barnum himself helped develop during his lifetime, reflect the kind of grand vision he brought to everything he touched. Even in choosing where he'd spend eternity, the greatest showman knew how to pick a venue. Our final stop brings us back to Hollywood Forever Cemetery, for one more farewell. And it's a farewell that, for many, carries the deepest emotional weight of any grave on this tour. In 2017, the remains of Judy Garland were moved here from Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, where she had been entombed for nearly 50 years. Her family wanted her to be in Los Angeles, near them, in the city where her career had blossomed and broken her heart. Frances Ethel Gum was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and was performing on stage by the age of 2. Signed by MGM at 13, she was given a new name and a new destiny. She became Judy Garland, and at 17 she played Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz and sang Over the Rainbow, a song that, more than 85 years later, still has the power to reduce grown adults to tears. She went on to star in Meet Me in St. Louis, A Star is Born, for which she received an Academy Award nomination, Easter Parade, and The Harvey Girls. She won a Special Academy Award as a juvenile and a Grammy for her legendary concert album Judy at Carnegie Hall. But the studio system that made her a star also destroyed her. MGM put her on pills to lose weight and pills to stay awake and pills to sleep. By her 20s, she was addicted. Her personal life was a series of broken marriages and financial catastrophes. And yet, when she walked on stage, something happened. Something electric, something almost supernatural. She could reach into the heart of an audience and squeeze. In June of 1969, living in London with her 5th husband, Judy Garland was found dead from an accidental overdose of barbiturates. She was 47 years old. Thousands attended her funeral in New York, and her friend Mickey Rooney, her co-star in all those MGM musicals of their youth, was among the pallbearers. She was originally entombed at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, but in January of 2017, nearly 50 years later, her remains were moved across the country to Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. Her daughter Liza Minnelli and other family members wanted her to be closer to them and closer to the city where her story, glorious and devastating in equal measure, had begun. Now she rests here at Hollywood Forever, in the city that made her and unmade her, in a cemetery full of the ghosts of old Hollywood. Fans visit her resting place year-round, leaving flowers, stuffed Toto dogs, and ruby slipper ornaments. Some come on June 22nd, the anniversary of her death. Some come around the holidays when Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas plays on every radio station, and the memories come flooding back. Somewhere, over the rainbow, the sun is shining. And down here, in a small corner of a Hollywood cemetery, Dorothy is finally home. And with that, our journey comes to its end. We've traveled from Memphis to Manhattan, from Paris to the Texas plains, from the Swiss countryside to the hills of Jamaica. We've stood before the largest mausoleum in North America and beside the simplest grave in an English churchyard. We've visited presidents and poets, kings and queens of music, rebels and visionaries, showmen and soldiers, comedians and composers. 60 remarkable people, 60 remarkable resting places. What they all share is this: they draw people to them. We come to these graves because we want to stand in the presence of greatness, even after that greatness has passed from this world. We want to leave a flower, or a guitar pick, or a lipstick kiss. We want to say, "I was here, and I remember." These resting places remind us that fame, no matter how bright, is temporary. But the stories, the songs, the words, and the courage these people left behind go on. Thank you for joining me on this tour. Until next time.